Hello, Chris Green here with the Flood Insurance Guru. Today we're talking about the recent Nashville floods that happened on March 27 and March 28, 2021. We want to talk about some things that you may want to think about of how this possible flood claim could impact your property. We're going to talk really about three things today. We're going to talk about property value, we're going to talk about future rates, and then we're going to talk about future availability of flood insurance. So let's talk about property value first. You know, the 2010 flood in Nashville caused some big issues with some property values. You have a lot of properties that were flooded that a lot of people just didn't want to buy because they knew they'd been flooded before. Then you had a lot of properties where rates skyrocketed after this. Then you also had some where rates were not even renewed at all. So these are all things that could happen after this flood claim in Nashville. So understand with the property value, if you file this claim, if you fix it on your own, are you in what's called a property disclosure state, like Tennessee? So these are all important. So let's talk a little bit about rates now. So you decide to go ahead and file that flood claim from this storm that happened on March 27th and 28th. What can you expect in the future? That's what we hear from people every day. Well, almost all the time, you're going to expect at least a significant rate increase. But if you're with a private flood insurance company, it could be very likely that you get non-renewed. We saw this happen after the Oklahoma and the Nebraska flooding. We saw this happen after the Alabama flooding in 2018 and 2019, where private companies had collected some flood data and determined they no longer wanted to do business in that part of the state. So you very well could have a rate that goes from 800 maybe to 3,000 or 4,000, because remember, surplus companies do not have to follow the same state guidelines. They don't have to follow rates necessarily with those states. And the majority of private flood insurance companies, as we stand here today, are what's called surplus or not admitted, which means they have different guidelines, like how claims can be handled, how you can appeal things. Now, what about the availability of flood insurance? As we mentioned, we've seen this happen in the past. We don't guarantee it's going to happen in the future, but it's a pretty good idea that after this flood, you could start to see some companies pull out of that Nashville area because they have new data that your flood risk score is really high. And what happens is maybe you have a policy through one of these companies. Then you may get a non-renewal letter when your renewal comes up. Maybe you do go to a different private company that offers coverage. Great. But what if you have to go back to the National Flood Insurance Program? Now, what if that $800 rate just became $3,000, $4,000, and $5,000 rate? We saw this happen a lot in Texas after the flooding there with Harvey, and the storms after that was that availability of private flood insurance pulling back. So these are some things you want to think about after this recent flood in Nashville. So if you've got questions about what to do, should you file a claim, what are your flood insurance options, especially at renewal, click below to visit our website, floodinsuranceguru.com. Remember, we have an educational background in flood mitigation, which means we can help you understand flood risks like this right here. Your flood insurance and mitigating your property long term. Thank you.